Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Long ago, the 6 queens lived in harmony. Then one day, King Henrietta... Wait, no, I'm mixing together 2 intros. You saw the thumbnail. This is about England's first executed queen, the scandal of Christendom herself, the king's whore, England's most impactful ghost, Anne Boleyn. Welcome to Ladies Fright. I'm your host, Joan. Trigger warnings. This video contains discussion of violence and miscarriages. Anne Boleyn is famously Henry VIII's second wife. They were married for 3 years starting in 1533 and ending with her execution in 1536. She has always been a controversial figure. She was the woman who stole the king away not only from the reigning queen, but also from the whole Roman Catholic Church. She fell out of favor even more with the public for her lavish spending and inability to produce a male heir. After Anne's death, her daughter made an effort to rehabilitate Anne's memory by saying how leading the English Reformation made her a martyr and saved England from the evil control of the Roman Catholic Church. In the Victorian era, there was a renewed interest in her, and today she is seen as a woman who was outspoken, who used her charm and wit in and outside of the bedchambers to girl boss her way to power. For being so outspoken in life, Anne still seems to have a lot to say in death. Her ghost is said to be present in several different locations. But why? Is she just that chatty? Or is she fulfilling the promise we have all made before? Haunting an ex who tries to erase you. I think to fully understand why Anne Boleyn's spirit is impressed in these locations, it is best to describe her history with them. I'll be going back and forth between history and ghostly tales, between his story and hers. Every great ghost story needs an air of mystery. It encourages some audience participation. Speaking of, please like and subscribe. For being such a well-known historic figure, much of Anne Boleyn's life is a mystery, down to her date of birth. Historians tend to go between the years of 1501 or 1507. More commonly, I saw the year 1501. Day and month have been completely lost to time. She was the daughter of Elizabeth Howard and Sir Thomas Boleyn. We do know she was born in Blickling Hall in Norwich, which is also where our first and honestly most dramatic sighting of Anne's spirit takes place. Anne seems to have a flair for poetry. On every May 19th, a carriage pulls up to Blickling Hall, driven by a headless coachman and drawn by 4 headless horses. Are we sensing a theme here? Next steps out the beheaded baddie herself, Anne. She's said to be wearing a white gown covered in blood and accessorized with her severed head under her arm. On the anniversary of her death, Anne spends the night roaming the halls and grounds of her birthplace until dawn's first light. Since it's such a calendared event, people gather every year at the gates of the estate to catch a glimpse of this legend. Anne spent a portion of her childhood at Hever Castle, which has its own version of Anne's ghost, which we will return to later on. Anne was invited to the schoolroom of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands. She was educated there for a little over a year until her father arranged to have her go to France and be the maid of honor to the future French Queen Mary Tudor. Mary was also the younger sister of Henry VIII. Mary eventually married King Louis XII in 1514. However, Louis passed away in 1515, which led Anne to switch from serving Mary to Mary's stepdaughter Claude, who married King Francis I of France. Anne stayed in Claude's court for 7 years and continued her education. While in France, Anne learned about the French language, the French fashion, the French's idea of courtly love, as well as French evangelicalism. Marguerite de Nevers was a religious reformist who would have been charged with heresy if she wasn't King Francis I's beloved sister. Marguerite had a humanist view of religion and has been credited for inspiring Anne's reformist beliefs. Now, we need to talk about the other Boleyn girl for a bit, Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn. Mary was also studying in France, but was called back in 1519 to marry William Carey. Well, that and the rumors going around about her sexual escapades. The guest list included Henry VIII himself. You would think I'm gonna go into a meet cute for Anne and Henry, but you would be wrong. Well, unless you did see the 2008 film. Then you may have some idea where this is going. No. Shortly after Mary's wedding to Carey, Mary became Henry's mistress. There is a debate if Henry VIII is the father of Mary's son Henry Carey. It is unclear when the affair began or when it ended, but Carey was never acknowledged by Henry to be his legitimate son. Interestingly though, Carey was put under Anne's wardship at some point in time during her engagement to Henry. I bring this up to give some insight into possible reasons why Anne acted as she did. Over time, the narrative of why Anne insisted on being the wife instead of just a mistress has changed. From her family using her as a political pawn, to her trying to rise in society, to even her just being an evil person who wanted a power greater than the church. I'm not going to say there is only one motivation. Often when retelling history and ghost stories, we turn real people into characters with very digestible motivations. Anne was a real person, and I'm sure there were many reasons, inspirations, and even contradictions of why she lived the way she did. In 1522, Anne's father called her back to England. Anne was to be used on his behalf in a political marriage that was meant to prevent a civil war in Ireland. However, those plans fell through, leaving Anne in England. With both Boleyn girls being home, the daughters to the courtier Sir Thomas Boleyn, they became ladies-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, and then Queen of England. Catherine and Henry's relationship is interesting to say the least. In hopes that a marriage would create a political alliance with her home country of Spain, Catherine was always intended to be the bride to the future King of England, Arthur Tudor. The House of Tudor had 4 children: Arthur, Henry VIII, Margaret, and Mary. Catherine and Arthur were married, but he passed away suddenly. To keep the alliance, it was arranged for Catherine to marry Henry. This marriage was blessed by the Pope, even though there is a line in the Bible found in Leviticus which has been translated to basically say, marrying your brother's wife is messed up and you will be cursed to be childless if you do it. However, an exception was found since it was believed that Catherine and Arthur never consummated their marriage. They were like 15 at the time. It is well established that Henry wanted a male child so he could secure an heir to the throne. So even though Catherine and Henry did have a child, Mary I of Tudor, she never had a male child who lived long enough to be considered an heir. This idea of being cursed was part of what fueled Henry's desire to divorce Catherine. Henry began to court Anne in 1526. Armed with her knowledge of flirting in the court from her time in France, Anne gave Henry just enough affection to keep him on the line. She made him wanted, but refused to be just another mistress. As mentioned before, Anne probably had many reasons. I personally find it hard to imagine she didn't consider the lack of security being a mistress granted. Henry could have been the father of her nephew, and Henry had already ended the affair with her sister before his birth. The only way to secure safety and power was to not become just another mistress. Often to escape from the prying eyes of the court, Anne would return to her childhood home of Hever Castle. This is where Henry would send her love letters, and Anne would answer him sometimes. Anne escaped to Hever when there was an outbreak of sweating sickness in 1528. Anne contracted the sickness, but fortunately, the King of England was obsessed with her and sent his own personal physician to make sure Anne was cared for. Some historians believe Anne being so sick is what drove Henry to decide he had to be with her and needed to annul his marriage to Catherine. Many would say between her childhood memories and the sweeter moments of her courting experience with Henry, Hever Castle held a lot of happy memories for Anne, and her spirit seems to mirror that as well. Anne seems to love a timely haunting, since her ghost is said to appear specifically around Christmas time. She may appear beneath the oak tree, which Henry and her were said to sat under, and had many long conversations while courting, or she has been seen crossing over the River Eden on the castle grounds. One noted sighting comes from a man named C.W. Banford in 1976. Banford visited the castle claiming to be a descendant of Anne Boleyn. When he stepped into her bedroom, he claimed to have a psychic vision of a young woman who he believed to be Anne. She was banging on the windowsill and scratching the walls, suggesting maybe her spirit is not as peaceful being trapped here as others thought. Anne wasn't the only one feeling trapped, since Henry was feeling trapped in his marriage to his sister-in-law turned bride, Catherine. He had sent William Knight to Pope Clement VII to ask for an annulment and correct the silly little oversight the last pope had about marrying his clearly non-virginal and now cursed wife, as well as bless his new marriage to Anne. A few problems with this plan. 1. The Pope is in the Vatican, which at the time was seized by the Holy Roman Emperor. And 2, the Pope was the prisoner of Charles V, who also happened to be the nephew of Catherine. So the answer was clearly a no. For those of us who have had a European history course in the last few years, or listened to the soundtrack to the musical Six, we know this is where everything truly begins to spiral. Instead of accepting the note from the Pope, Henry chose to break off from the Catholic Church and become the head of the church himself. It is hard to argue that Anne's reformist beliefs did not influence this decision. Many believe she gave him William Tyndale's pamphlet, Obedience of a Christian Man, to read, which argued the supreme authority was not held by the Pope, but instead by the words of God within the Bible. At the time, Bibles were written in Latin and left to the Pope to interpret not only what was literally said, but also what it meant. Part of the humanist reformist view was to have the Bible translated into local languages so it could be more accessible and people could read directly the words of God. Henry paired his spiritual separation with the church with a physical separation from his wife. He banished Catherine from the court and gave her rooms to Anne. This gave Anne the space and status to work on solidifying an alliance with France. She got Henry and Francis I, remember that guy, together for a conference in Calais. Henry wanted Francis I to acknowledge his intended marriage to Anne, so before the conference, he had to prove he was serious about her being the next queen. He gave her the title of Marquisate of Pembroke on the 1st of September 1532 at Windsor Castle, which is exactly where our next ghost story takes place. Since every resource I looked at said this, I think I'm under some contract to also say it. Windsor Castle is the oldest occupied castle in the world. Now with that out of the way. Anne is said to be spotted in 2 places in this castle, and the vibe she gives off? Vastly different. In a portion of the castle called Dean's Cloister, she is seen peering out the window. The other sighting is her decapitated body running down the hall, carrying her screaming head. As I said, vastly different vibes. A secret marriage ceremony was held on November 14th, 1532. This was considered an unlawful marriage, but was enough for Anne and Henry to take their relationship all the way. And Anne was pregnant soon after. They had another private marriage on January 25th, 1533, but it was not until May that the Archbishop of Canterbury was able to rule Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void, and then 5 days later, on the 28th of May, 1533, Henry and Anne's marriage was declared good and valid. By the first day of June, Catherine was stripped of her title as queen, and Anne was crowned queen consort. She was the last queen consort to be crowned separately from her husband. Also, interestingly, she was crowned with the St. Edward's crown, which has only been used for kings prior. This was due to the belief that Anne was pregnant with a boy. Actually, everyone was highly convinced it was a boy. Out of all the royal physicians and astrologers, only one predicted Anne was going to have a girl. They had prepared the birth announcements with Prince written on them, which had to be changed to Princess when Anne gave birth to the future Queen of England, Elizabeth I. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Once becoming queen consort, Anne was moved to Hampton Court. She was actually the first queen to take residency there, and she seems to have remained a resident there even to this day. There have been reports of Anne's apparition wearing a blue or black dress, and once again, headless, wandering the halls of the court, although she's not alone this time. Both the spirits of Jane Seymour and Catherine Howard join her in the haunting of the residency. So now in history, Anne is legally married to Henry, she's queen consort, her man is following her reformist belief, and he's head of the Church of England. She had a daughter instead of a son, but the baby is healthy, and there are high hopes she can produce a healthy male heir to the throne. Overall, life is good. Well, at least it was for a few months. Soon after their nuptials, Henry went right back to his cheating ways. Well, what we would consider cheating nowadays. I'm not sure what were the moral standards of having a mistress at the time. Anyway, Henry told Anne that if she didn't like it, she should just shut her eyes, and he could humble her just as quickly as he exalted her. Henry seems to have liked to keep his future brides close, both physically and familially. He started to court Anne's lady-in-waiting and first cousin, Jane Seymour. There's a story that during one of Anne's pregnancies, Henry gave Jane a locket with his portrait inside. Right in front of Anne, Jane began opening and closing the locket just so Anne could get a glimpse of the image inside. Rightfully pissed off, Anne ripped the locket off of Jane's neck so hard her hand bled. During her final pregnancy, Henry had the worst fall off of a horse he had ever had during a joust. His leg was injured, and he had suffered a head injury, which some historians attribute to his brutal ruling style for the rest of his reign. Possibly due to the stress of needing to produce a male heir, or the rage caused by Jane's open flirting, or even the anxiety from Henry's accident, Anne miscarried what was believed to be a baby boy 5 days later. The loss of this child is not only what ended her marriage, but condemned her to death. Henry was once again stuck in a marriage, but this time he had all the power he needed to make it go away. Anne had a reputation for speaking her mind, sometimes not in the most queen-like manner. She also had many men attracted to her prior and during her marriage to Henry. So when the king was looking to end his marriage and get into the next one with Jane Seymour, all Henry's men had to do was say Anne was telling people in court about the size of Henry's royal scepter, and she was having extramarital affairs with several men, one of them being her own brother. Anne was charged based on the confessions from men who were tortured. All but one pled guilty at their trials. Anne was arrested and held for 9 days while Thomas Cromwell, Henry's most trusted advisor, developed a case against her. On the 15th of May, 1536, Anne was put on trial for adultery, incest, and high treason. The jury unanimously found her guilty. These charges were punishable by public execution. On May 17th, Anne and Henry's marriage was declared null and void. The 18th was supposed to be her execution date, but it was delayed since Henry wanted a skilled French swordsman to be the executioner. On the 19th, the morning of her execution, the Constable of the Tower of London, William Kingston, visited where Anne was being held. He wrote, "And in writing she sent for me. And at my coming she said, 'Mr. Kingston, I hear I shall not die afore noon, and I am very sorry therefore, for I thought to be dead by this time and past my pain.' I told her it should be no pain. It was so little. And then she said, 'I heard say the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck.' And then she puts her hands about it, laughing heartily. I've seen many men and also women executed, and that they have been in great sorrow. And to my knowledge, this lady has much joy in death." Kingston took her to Mass, where she promised on the Eucharist she had always been faithful to the king. Even being a reformist, Anne was very serious in her faith, so swearing on what she believed to be the body and blood of the Lord is a huge deal. Never before had a queen been sentenced to execution. Many people could not believe it and thought there was no possible way Henry would go through with it. Anne may have even believed it, since there are accounts of her looking back several times while being led to the scaffolding built on the north side of the White Tower. At the top of the scaffolding, she addressed the crowd of nearly 1,000 people. Quote, Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I condemn my soul." Unquote. A speech praising the man who's calling for your death may feel out of place. However, she wanted to protect her daughter, Elizabeth. She had already seen the treatment of Henry's first daughter turned bastard, Mary, and would have been rightfully worried what her death would mean for her living kin. Though kind to the king, the speech lacked one major aspect: a confession of guilt. It would not matter, though. Henry wasn't even there to hear the words. Instead, Henry and Jane were both at Marwell Hall, walking the grounds, planning their wedding. Henry and Jane would be betrothed the day after Anne's death, and then married only 11 days later. Maybe Anne felt he really needed to hear those words, since her ghost is said to be found roaming the grounds of Marwell. Atop of the scaffold, facing death, she had a tearful goodbye to her two ladies-in-waiting who had accompanied her. She knelt down in prayer as one of the ladies blindfolded her. She stayed kneeling upright, as was the French style of beheading. She muttered her final prayer of "Jesu, receive my soul. Lord God, have pity on my soul." And with a single stroke, she was beheaded and the first ever execution of an English queen was done. The Tower of London is the setting of Anne's most renowned ghostly sightings. In 1864, an on-duty guard was patrolling the ground when he saw a figure in white coming towards him. He ordered the figure to stop and to not come any closer, yet the figure did not yield. The guard plunged his bayonet into the figure and was taken aback when he did not feel contact with flesh. The bayonet just went right through them. Looking up close now, he saw the figure's feet were not even touching the ground. Instead, they were floating right above, and the bonnet that she was wearing held no head inside. The shock of this caused him to faint, which apparently is not allowed to do while you're on guard and could get you a lengthy prison sentence for fainting while on duty and abandoning your post. This guard was saved from this because he wasn't the only witness of the strange event that night. From the window of his quarters, Captain J.D. Dundas, who was later promoted to Major General of the 60th Rifles Regiment, was able to see the courtyard in front of where Anne Boleyn was held for execution. He was looking out the exact night the fainting incident occurred, and he saw the guard acting strangely and about to charge. Curious, he looked around to see what the aim of the attack was, only to find a whitish-looking female figure sliding towards the guard. He couldn't look away as the guard lunged forward and also witnessed the bayonet go right through her, and then the guard fainting. After the execution, Anne was placed in an elm chest. Her lifeless body replaced the bow staves for Ireland, since no coffin had been prepared. It was said her head was cradled under her arm. She was placed in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Whether Henry was driven by the feeling of great betrayal or great guilt, he ordered to have all traces of Anne removed from the royal residence. Her initials, emblems, and portraits were all to be removed, and she was not to be mentioned. Due to this action, Anne's appearance is somewhat up for debate, which makes our final ghost story from the Tower of London very interesting. One night, there was a light flickering in the Chapel Royal. A captain of the guard, concerned someone was trespassing, climbed up the ladder to check. There, he saw a truly unbelievable sight. Before him was a whole procession of knights and ladies dressed in beautiful costumes and parading around the chapel. Their leader was an elegant-looking woman. The vision soon disappeared, leaving the captain wondering not only what he had just seen, but who he had just seen. He later discovered it must have been Anne's apparition, since it so closely resembled the portraits of her he had seen. After Anne's life was ended, so much of her direct voice was lost. Now we are left with others' impressions and interpretations of her, propaganda for and against her, as well as hearsay passed down for generations. For a woman who was said to be so educated, quick-witted, influential, and vocal, I can't imagine a face worse than being silenced and erased. Maybe her ghost appears in so many places because she did have such an impact on the world, and is some form of cosmic justice. Or she refuses to be silenced and haunts these places to remind us of how she has been wronged. Or maybe there's no ghost, and we are trying to find a way to speak about the one Henry tried to erase and yet stayed the most influential and important queen consort England has ever had. But what do I know? I'm just some lady talking about some frights. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. This was actually the first script I wrote. Just thinking about it, maybe one time I'll not end these with this is the first, this is the first. There's a lot of firsts happening right now. If you have made it this far, please like, comment, and subscribe. Give me some feedback. I'm wearing my Ren Fair costume. Do you go to the Ren Fair? I know she's not the Renaissance, it's fine. This is just what I have, okay? I'm just trying to make it visually interesting for all of you. Why are you so angry at me? Just kidding, I should talk to my therapist about that. Anyway, if you want to continue to follow Ladies Fright and keep up to date with everything, you can follow us on all different forms of social media. You can find them in the link tree, which will be in the channel's description. Once again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great time.